Have you ever noticed that strange phenomenon that happens when you drop a coin or a paperclip onto the floor and suddenly it disappears? Or how you could set your keys down on your coffee table and then suddenly it reappears between your couch cushions? No, you aren't crazy. No, you didn't misplace your keys. No one can really understand it, so they chalk it up to losing things or just forgetting that they moved it. But I've gone to where all your missing socks and loose change are. I've gone to the in-between. It was by accident, really. Like most things that end up there, it just sort of happened, and I found myself caught in a world of infinite piles of stuff. You'd think that the world would be small, since it exists behind shelves and underneath beds. But it's vast and endless, stretching on for what seems like an eternity. I found myself falling into the world as I walked down the street and turned into an alleyway. In between two brick apartments I went, and into the in-between I came out. I walked amongst the piles of socks, coins, and jewelry that reached up into the void above, towering high like skyscrapers. There were moments when I stumbled upon swaying piles, and cautiously, I made my way around them, fearing that the objects might come tumbling down and crush me underneath its tremendous weight. I walked around this world for what felt like hours, never seeing another person or any other living thing, never finding an exit to this dark dimension filled with an abundance of lost items. Hours stretched to days, and soon I came to realize that I, myself, had become a lost item. Hunger gnawed at me, and my hollow stomach began to contract with painful cramps. The saliva in my mouth dried until my tongue stuck to its roof and my lips stayed glued shut, bound by the dried skin and saliva from the last few days when I had been hydrated enough to lick them. I'd nearly given up. Then I found a cold pizza slice in that infinite mess. When I realized that there was food there, I began to scavenge the in-between for more. I searched for water or sodas or any kind of drink that I might find, and found half-finished bottles of various soft drinks. It made me think of all the times I'd tossed an unfinished drink into the back of my car, and eventually, when it was time to clean, I'd find them stuck underneath the car seats, or in between the seat and the door. I didn't know how to feel about that. Stuck there, in the in-between. Was I grateful because one of the very drinks that I'd found might have been my own, or did I feel like I had taken something as simple as a soda for granted then? But eventually, I managed to gather enough food to keep me alive because my time there continued on until months began to fly by. I only had a few scrap sheets of paper, a pencil snapped in half, and a kitchen timer with me to keep track of the days. I had reset the timer every 6 hours, drawing a small line on the scrap sheet every 12th hour, marking away my days and nights. I learned to sleep there amongst the piles of things, learned to keep myself from breaking down and giving up. I'd contemplated going to one of those swaying piles and letting it crush me, letting it bury me till I became a permanent fixture in this world of lost things. Or would my body have eventually made its way back, and I would have just become another Jane Doe? But I pushed those dark thoughts aside. I survived. I found little things to keep myself distracted. And then I finally found another person. They were just sitting there, back turned toward me, resting against a mixed pile of laundry. I couldn't tell what they were doing, but I decided to go to them. The excitement of finding another person, the relief of not having to be alone anymore, brought my brisk stride to a sprint. I slowed when I neared them, worried about startling them. "Hey!" They continued to keep their back towards me. "Hello?" They didn't answer. I carefully stepped toward them now, body trembling from the previous adrenaline. I drew close enough to them to see the stillness of their shoulders. A bead of sweat inched down my forehead, and I quickly wiped at it as I started to circle to the front of the person. Like me, they had found a method to keep track of time here. In one of his bony hands, he held a wristwatch. The other held a golden fountain pen. He'd drawn his tallies on a yellow-stained handkerchief, and beside him, he had a tin that looked ancient. I took a moment to really look at him, to take in his tailcoat and pants, to look at the worn but expensive-looking shoes, and almost swayed into the blackness that I had pushed toward the back of my mind. I gingerly pulled the handkerchief from his limp hands and took into account all the tallies he had written. They marked the front and back till the pale yellow fabric became just a black stain at the bottom. Fortunately, my story doesn't follow in the shadow of his. If it had, then I wouldn't be able to write this. There was no internet or service there. To be in the in-between means that you were completely tied off from the outside world. But I can't say much happened. I wandered around that plane completely and utterly alone, never seeing another person or body wasting away in the in-between with me. I aged. My once short, chin-length bob grew till it brushed against my waist. I became thin until I was just tendons and bone. Occasionally, I would catch my reflection in shards of broken glass or mirrors and see a gaunt and ugly thing stare back at me. When I thought that I would die there, never seeing home again, I found a small sliver of light in this dusk, dull, dark world shining between the crevices of a pile of pens. I wandered to it like a moth, mindlessly, not considering any possible consequences. I couldn't tell you if I was tired or if I just didn't care. But I walked toward it and stumbled into the pile. I clawed at the pens, shifting them away, tossing them behind me when they started to collapse back on top of one another. And then I reached it. The light. My hand sank into it, and then my arm. I was ripped forward, unable to do anything more than let out a weak cry from what felt like years that I had spent utterly silent. When I opened my eyes, the light burned into them, and it felt like I was in an oven. The light poured over me, its heat searing. Slowly, my eyes adjusted. I blinked back my tears as the blue of the sky began to leak into my vision. My hand shook as it reached toward the deep, piercing blue. The sun shined down on it, the rays beaming through the translucent skin, making my hands look like they were glowing red within. I wanted to cry. I wanted to shout, but my body was too weak. Instead, I laid there till my senses finally caught up, and I could tell I was in an empty park. Beside me laid a pink pen with cupcakes printed across it. Someone must have dropped it somewhere, and it had wound up here from the in-between. Everyone says I was gone for almost a year. I swear it'd been longer there, in that other world. I'd come home to find my last photo hanging over the fireplace, and my mother still mourning me. They'd buried an empty casket, and in the graveyard at my mother's church sat a tombstone with my name. I used to go out almost every night with my friends, have a few drinks, go shopping, or eat lunch with them. But now I stay home. I'm careful of where I step. Sometimes, I'm even afraid to step through the doorway of one room to the next, terrified that I'll be pulled back into the in-between. I don't think it would let me escape a second time.